While the closed-door session was going on inside the governor's office, concerned citizens from the Alabama Coalition Against Hunger and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference marched with picket signs in the hallway outside the governor's office. The picketers chanted "Fob is a racist" and sang freedom songs. After 30 minutes, State Trooper Colonel Jerry Shoemaker told the picketers they had to leave.
You're not going to demonstrate here in front of a meeting, a public meeting in a public building. That's not allowed, and you're not going to be allowed.
It's not allowed, but you still refusing to show me the law. You still refuse to show me the law.
The picketers left the building but relocated outside on the north side of the Capitol.
Fob is a racist. Fob is a racist. Fob is a racist. Fob is a racist.
After the meeting, the governor's legal advisor, Jimmy Sanford, told reporters the board voted to fire Cooper. He says the members also voted to issue a resolution thanking the commissioner for his services to the PNS board. Sanford refused to comment on what was discussed, but says the reason for the closed meeting is that Commissioner Cooper's good name and character were discussed. A 1976 ruling from then Attorney General Bill Baxley upholds closed meetings for this reason. When Sanford was asked why other business transpired behind closed doors, he said the matter had been discussed with Attorney General Charles Graddick and had his clearance. Yesterday, Governor Fob James named 2 new members to the PNS board to replace the 2 black members he recently removed. The newest board members, who are both white, are Dr. Kenneth Harris and Calvin Whitesell. Both men attended today's meeting and voted. When asked if race was the reason behind Cooper's firing, Sanford said no. The board also voted to appoint Medical Services Director Rebecca Beasley as acting commissioner until a replacement can be found. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The clinic diagnoses and evaluates handicapped children, then recommends treatment or specific services that are needed. These evaluations may involve medical, nursing, social work, educational, and psychological development assessments. Little Jesse Jackson is one of the children evaluated by the clinic. He has cerebral palsy and attends the Children's Center School.
A lot of children may not get the kind of treatment or diagnosis that they would normally get. Is that right?
That's correct. We could lose personnel. We could lose funds to continue services. We could be eliminated completely. And it's a full gamut of things, but it would definitely have a drastic effect.
Boychuk says the clinic offers very important services to children and parents in and around the Montgomery area, services they couldn't receive anywhere else.
Early identification of handicapping conditions and early intervention is very important. It can make the difference between a person who is dependent all his life and a person who is a productive, happy individual in the community.
Clinic directors are asking concerned citizens to send letters to Congress asking that funds for the maternal and child health care projects be earmarked to keep it thriving. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Well, I think they had got the wrong report, and they asked me what was the reason that John was dismissed, and I told them it was involved in a fraternity, and not John himself. It was this whole group of them.
Oh, I see. The fraternity itself.
Right.
So practice will begin on schedule, huh?
On schedule, and we disappointed a little bit because all the kids had been working all this winter program real hard, and I don't know where it set us back mentally, but I'm hoping it won't. And it got me down one while first hour, and so I think we'll regroup though.
The Tide shot even par 288 in the opening round. Another SEC school, Mississippi State, is second at 289. 2 ACC golf teams hold down the third and fourth places. Wake Forest at 3 over 291 and Clemson at 293. Auburn and Troy State are tied for fifth at 296. Mississippi State's David Allen took medalist honors with a 3 under 69. Auburn's Bill Bergen is one of 4 golfers a shot back. David Abel of Wake Forest, Jack Penley of Clemson, and Jeff Larkin of Georgia joined Bergen at 2 under 70. Alabama's Steve Lowry fired a 1-under-71. Coach Conrad Raylick obviously pleased with his team's performance today. Cecil Ingram fashioned a 72, narrowly missing a long putt here at 5. Auburn's Bill Bergen found some trouble on that same hole, but he made a nice recovery with his chip shot. And that had to sit pretty well with his coach, Sonny Dragoin. Bing Crosby's boy, Nathaniel, had his problems in the brisk winds. The Miami golfer struggled to an 83, but he did attract much of the gallery's attention. See if you can recognize this golf swing. Note the setup and forward press. That's Jack Nicklaus Jr., a 78 for Nicklaus today. The tournament favorite, Jody Mudd, could do no better than 76, though he made his putt here. It's still anybody's game. The tournament runs through Sunday, and admission is free to the public. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports. It was a pitcher's duel for 4 2/3 innings tonight. Jeff Davis relied on the arm of Tommy Wachs. Lanier countered with Jeff Dean. Dean gave up 1 run early before things started popping in the Vols' half of the 5th. Give Dean credit, he should have gotten out of the inning unscathed had it not been for some poor fielding from his teammates. With 2 outs in the 5th, the Poets muffed 2 easy infield pops. The Vols cashed in. Abe Thomas drove in Kevin Henry, and Dean walked in Lewis Thornton here. The big blow was Jeff Goff's triple to left center with the bases loaded. Everyone came home. First Thomas, then Phil King, and finally Al Perkins. The Vols were up 6-0, and that's how it ended. A shutout for Tommy Wachs. Dave Cody, WSFA TV Sports.
You got shots of them at different places.
Even the rain held off for these special children. They've been practicing all year for the event, in the softball throw, the log roll, and running races. Most of the children are considered trainable, and Special Olympics gives them the chance to learn lessons in discipline and participation. They have the opportunity to become involved in athletics, an experience they might otherwise miss because they attend special schools. There were even more volunteers at the Special Olympics than there were children. The district director says that's a sign of an improving public attitude toward handicapped children. He says one volunteer told him that once he got involved with Special Olympics, he couldn't stay away. One look at the children's faces will tell you why. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
This attempt.
Yes.
Most helpful. Yeah, I mean, it was just he's putting it down to
Weather topped Alabama's week with a killer tornado striking the small community of Hurtsboro. The twister slammed into the Russell County town shortly after 2 Wednesday morning, killing 2 elderly residents and destroying much of the city. Most of the major damage was along Highway 26. Scores of trees, row after row of houses and shops, the post office, a power substation, all destroyed. One positive note, shortly after the tornado ripped through Hurtsboro, food and emergency water supplies were on the way from neighboring cities, as were volunteers to help start cleaning up and care for the displaced. Also here in Montgomery, 2 radio stations, WHHY and WLWI, spearheaded a drive to gather up clothing and non-perishable food items to take to Hurtsboro. The Public Service Commission was looking at another rate hike request this past week. Western Union wants to raise its rates for full-rate telegrams, public opinion message telegrams, overnight telegrams, and delivery service. The problem is that there's been a decline in telegrams being sent in Alabama. Western Union says they need to raise the rates substantially to offset this trend and to offset higher operating costs. The last statewide rate increase for Western Union was in 1975. One of the Public Service Commissioners, by the way, called it quits this week. Pete Matthews, who was elected to the commission in 1978, is resigning because he says he's just not happy with the job. His term wouldn't have run out until 1983. He sat in on his last PSC meeting this past week. Governor James has started reviewing applications, and he's expected to name a successor soon. On the subject of utilities, Alabama Power got some good news this week. The company received a full power license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the second unit at the Farley Nuclear Plant near Dothan. Last October, the NRC had issued the utility a low-power operating license, which allowed Alabama Power to load fuel and test the nuclear unit. The loading has now been completed. Testing is in full swing, with the reactor expected to go online by midsummer. The battle over Gary Cooper's job continued and was completed on Capitol Hill this past week. Chris Grimshaw explains in the Legislative Week in Review.
Always wanted to shoot each other at the wrong time of night.
As soon as he gets through up there, we want y'all to move. I'm trying to look out for you.
Okay. Jane. Uh-huh.
Cooper held on all week as he fought Governor James, who cashed in a 2-year-old signed but undated letter of resignation from Cooper. All cabinet members have signed such letters. It was Monday that the governor told Cooper to resign because the two had opposite philosophies on operating state government. More specifically, the two disagreed on just how many cuts could be made in pensions and security and keep the department within its $5 million state budget. But Cooper refused to resign, saying only the full Pensions and Security Board could remove him from office. But two members of that board were also fired by Governor James, who says the two members had the same philosophy as Cooper. During the week, the Black Legislative Caucus came to Cooper's support, holding a news conference one day and meeting with the governor later in the week. At least one state senator, Ed Robertson of Tuscaloosa, stood up in support of the governor's actions. Cooper's resignation was also protested by the Coalition Against Hunger, a predominantly black group. By Friday, the governor had found 2 new board members and led a 5-2 PNS board vote to let Cooper go. The state general fund budget swelled to new heights this week with a promise of at least $449 million paid by oil companies for the right to drill for oil off the Alabama Gulf Coast. The news of this financial bonanza created a long list of suggestions from legislators on how to best spend it. Governor James also announced his spending plan, but said he would be inclined to use the new money as leverage against the legislature to pass his proposed unearmarking and employee retirement benefit reductions. The unearmarking issue is expected to be debated by the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee next week. Tuesday, Alabama's death penalty bill was signed into law. Governor James held a news conference to sign the document, which replaces Alabama's capital punishment law struck down as unconstitutional last summer. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Some 60 million Americans watch television daytime dramas known as soap operas daily. Now researchers in Buffalo, New York have included that soap operas could be having a significant impact on our lives. And that's our news for, well, the tape isn't here yet. We're waiting for the tape. It's coming up. Here on TV 12, we see all the soap operas every day, and you probably are a big fan if you're like everybody else.
Manufacturing. High school employees get together only once a week to turn out their product. But unlike other junior achievement companies, they don't make lamps or ashtrays.
The gathering was to commemorate the 13th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. In fact, the park where the rally took place had been King's staging area for massive demonstrations in the 1960s. The Reverend Jesse Jackson, who heads Operation Push, People United to Save Humanity, told the predominantly black crowd that the right to vote is not negotiable. He says the Selma March is to support the Voting Rights Act and is also in protest of the Atlanta killings.
Alabama and South Carolina will again become the national headquarters of the right to vote movement. Today marks the beginning of a spring offensive. We're going to march for the right to vote. We're going to march against racist reapportionment. We're going to march for a job. We're going to march for an income. And we're going to march until our children are saved and the killing stops.
Several Alabama political figures appeared at the rally, including State Representative Alvin Holmes and former Welfare Commissioner Gary Cooper, who both criticized Governor Fob James for firing Cooper. Jane Matheson, WSFA TV News.
Out of the hundreds of specialized products on the market to clean virtually every household need, there are probably about 4 common household goods already in the kitchen cupboard that can do the same cleaning job, but cheaper. Petroleum jelly, or the all-purpose lubricant, helps stop door squeaks and prevents most rusting. Table salt can unstick that sticky iron by sprinkling salt on wax paper and using a hot iron over it. Vinegar and water makes for an excellent window cleaner, and it doesn't streak. Vinegar also rinses pesticides off vegetables. And the multi-versatile baking soda not only cleans appliances, but deodorizes them as well. Baking soda keeps cat litter cleaner and smelling fresher longer. And it's also a good carpet cleaner. Just sprinkle, let stand for 15 minutes and vacuum. Baking soda is less expensive to use than most commercial carpet deodorizers. So check the kitchen cabinet first for the common household cleaners, and perhaps only buy commercial cleaners when the kitchen cupboard is bare. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Appreciate it.
To the other side, okay? Okay, get yourself set.
All right, stay towards the back and stay on the edge. Hold it. Wait, are you shooting? Wait, we got a shot here.
17 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a march from the Brown Chapel Church in Selma across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where violence broke out, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act came to life. This weekend, from the same church, it was Reverend Jesse Jackson who urged Congress to renew the Voting Rights Act.
We are in Selma, Alabama, because there are still means being used to keep blacks off the books. I submit in 1981, we must march from Selma to Washington, D.C.
Several thousand blacks joined Jackson in the march. 17 years ago, the security was heavy. At this march, the police were few and mostly black. But there was no violence. Beyond the renewal of the Voting Rights Act, the march remembered the slain children in Atlanta, the murder of a young black child in Mobile, Alabama, and even the attempted assassination of President Reagan. But it was all tied together with the renewal of the Voting Rights Act.
America, it's time to come back to your senses. America, it's time to come back to reality. America, it's time to come back to decency. We must say to America, come on back home to justice and liberty for all of God's children. This will be a significant day.
It wasn't hard for Reverend Jackson to generate a sense of urgency about the Voting Rights Renewal Act here in Selma. The hard part is taking that sense of urgency to a congressional committee in Washington, and that'll be next summer. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News, Selma, Alabama.
I think he's pleased to be here. He's went into college with sort of the feeling that he was just a fair junior player and has some nice ability, but he's got to learn how to score. And he played well last week to qualify to come here for this tournament. And I think he's just excited to be here. And he's going to do fine. Give him another year or two. He's going to be a nice player.
Any problem with having a famous father in the game?
Oh, I'm sure he's had some problems with it, but he's a pretty mature young man and handled it very well.
If young Jack decides to try to play the game professionally, do you think being the father of a great player will be a help or a hindrance?
Well, I think he's beyond that stage. I think that the way I've sort of handled Jack growing up is that if he got to college liking the game of golf, then I've really have accomplished an awful lot, because he enjoyed playing through school, but you know, every place he goes, people are on his back about me and everything, and so I pretty much stayed away from him, let him sort of develop by himself and play golf because he wanted to play it, not because I wanted him to play it. He has the potential to probably do whatever he wants, and I think that a lot of these kids have that opportunity to be just as good as they want to be. It's just how hard they want to work at it and how much they want it.
One of the dreams of the late Dr. Martin Luther King was voting rights for all, an issue he championed during the 1965 march that ended in violence. The Voting Rights Act later guaranteed King's dream, but now many blacks feel the country is far from meeting the goal of the 1965 law. And because the act must be renewed next year, civil rights activist Jesse Jackson, Joseph Lowery, and others renewed the cause this weekend with thousands of blacks at the Brown Chapel Church in Selma, the church used during King's March almost 20 years ago.
We are in Selma, Alabama, because there are still means being used to keep blacks off the books.
It took nearly an hour for the long procession to wind its way through Selma. There weren't any crowds watching, just a few groups of people. There were also fewer police this weekend than 17 years ago, but this time there was no violence, and the marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where 1965 police dogs and billy clubs broke up the march. The Voting Rights Act was one of this weekend's motives, but so was violence, like Atlanta's string of child murders and the attempted assassination of President Reagan. The speakers were forceful and able to rekindle among these people a sense of urgency about what was called a crumbling America, losing sight of its goal. What Jackson and Lowery want to do now is transfer that sense of urgency to Congress, which must decide if the Voting Rights Act is still needed. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News in Selma.
Governor, what would you do? You mentioned earlier that we're being held hostage, essentially, in our own country. What would you do about it?
I'd start swift, deadly punishment for those who deserved it, who commit violent crimes in this country. We should have started 10 or 15 years ago when I suggested it running for president in 1968 and 1972, when I was laughed at. Except in 1972, it was taking effect because I was the leading candidate when I was gunned down in Laurel, Maryland in 1972.
How much responsibility is in the courts in your judgment?
The federal courts have, they have handcuffed the hands of the police to such an extent that it's hard to disobey the law. If I walk out of this building today and I'm knocked in the head as a result of some federal judicial decision, the person who knocked me in the head is out of jail before I get to the cemetery or before I get to the hospital. Let's try punishment for a while and see if that won't work.
Governor, the man who shot you, Mr. Bremer, is eligible for parole next year. What is your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that I have no suggestions for the officials in Maryland. But all I can say is this: if he is paroled in 1982, he will be on the street a free man, and I'll still be consigned to a wheelchair.
Heflin told this group of lawyers that next to inflation, crime is the biggest problem that Americans face. Using Monday's assassination attempt as an example, Heflin said that the increase in crime is now reaching the crisis stage, especially here in Alabama.
Figures released recently show that there's been a considerable increase in crime in Alabama over the last year, that robberies were up 23% over what it was. And all across America, crime is on the rise. So we've got to do something about crime. We can't sit back and just let it continue to grow and grow and grow. Government has to be responsible for it. Deuce has to be responsive towards doing something about it.
The senator will soon introduce a bill called the War on Violent Crime Act. Some of the things included in his 10-point plan are a violent crime administration to oversee police training and research, a national police academy, sort of a West Point for officers, a provision that would give habitual criminals with 3 felony convictions a mandatory life sentence, an extra 5 years tacked on to one convicted of a violent crime involving handguns, and stiffer penalties for drug-related crimes, particularly drugstore robberies. Heflin also suggested using radio and television to publicize any criminals at large. Senator Heflin told me it may be a while before this bill actually comes before the legislature because of budget cuts and further investigation. But he says it's time we started a war on crime in this country, and he says he thinks it's appropriate that that war should start right here in Alabama.
Only Fred could do that.
I know.
WSFA.
Wallace himself, left paralyzed from an assassination attempt in 1972, told Good Morning America's David Hartman that he is against gun control and that it is too late to try and use it. He says it might have been an alternative 150 years ago, but not today. He says criminals who rob, shoot, murder, and rape will not obey a gun control law. Wallace also repeated his belief in the death penalty.
I'd start swift, deadly punishment for those who deserved it, who commit violent crimes in this country. We should have started 10 or 15 years ago when I suggested it running for president in 1968 and 1972, when I was laughed at, except in 1972 it was taken effect because I was the leading candidate when I was gunned down in Laurel, Maryland in 1972.
Wallace says his first reaction to last week's attempt on President Reagan's life was shock, dismay, anger, sadness, and prayer. The former governor was asked about his feelings concerning the impending release of Arthur Bremer, the man convicted of shooting him.
If he is paroled in 1982, he will be on the street a free man, and I'll still be consigned to a wheelchair.
Dan Black, WSFA TV News.
Solid ground for suspending or rejecting interstate commerce commission as solid ground for rejection. Again, down the would advise interstate
Cooper's fight with the governor started when state finances were slim and cuts were ordered by the governor, cuts Cooper didn't want to make. But his prepared statement was sedate and polite.
I have decided not to contest the decision of the board at this time. Last, I'd like to thank Governor Fob James for providing me with the rare and wonderful opportunity for 2 years and 2 months to be of service to the good people of Alabama.
Cooper even defended the governor in a peculiar way against allegations James was a racist in firing 2 black pensions and security board members.
I honestly think that had those people been green, blue, or purple, and they hadn't wanted to vote with the governor, he would have fired them. I really do.
Cooper blames his dismissal on pure difference of opinion over priorities and funding of state government. Although Cooper says he's not going to contest the board's decision, he intends to have his lawyers review what he described as possible illegalities with the board's vote.
And when you appoint people who have absolutely no knowledge of the operation of the department, no background, and have them vote on such an important issue as whether or not to hire or fire a commissioner, then the law is being circumvented.
Cooper's immediate plans are up in the air. Private business now, and perhaps later, he says, some more politics, but he wouldn't say at what level. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Took out all the capitals that made a number of changes in the budget that they have requested that the substitute be drawn and the changes be made, such as last year Mr. Nelmo handled a bill brought in. I put that back in the budget. It wasn't in the governor's budget because I think this legislative body has a firm commitment to that part if and when they need the funds, we can have them because they have applied for $10,000. Now, a lot of proposals by the Conservation Department is the way they might like to.
Our story begins at the Montgomery Brockway Glass Company. Millions of glassware items are shipped from this plant to all parts of the South every year. Most of the shipments are made by truck, and because of the fragile nature of the glass, boxes of glassware are placed on this wooden pallet and then loaded on the trucks. The pallets are vital to the storing and shipping of Brockway products. But an inventory at the plant revealed large numbers of the pallets to be missing. Private detectives Kerner and Roy were hired to find out where they were going.
We set up an undercover operation where we physically purchased the pallets from the carriers. We documented this with videotapes. We monitored telephone conversations, payoff conversations, paid for our purchases in marked money. I think we probably purchased somewhere in the neighborhood at our cost of $40,000 or $42,000 worth in just 6.5 months. We were set up, before we closed our investigation, we were set up to buy at our cost, I think it was $300,000 worth of pallets a year if we had continued our operation.
That investigation uncovered several alleged schemes used to steal pallets.
He would send in a bill stating he was sending back, let's say, 300 good pallets. When we unloaded the truck, we had 2 things that were happening. We were receiving a lesser number of good pallets and an equal number of repairable or junk pallets. Either that or there was a pallet loss or discrepancy on the count. Maybe 1 stack of pallets was missing from the truck. So in crediting the customer, we would give him credit just for the pallets that we received, the number that we received, and for the condition that the pallets were in.
Before the investigation was over, Kerner and Roy had audio and videotapes of what they described as bribes and payoffs. They also say they have learned the identities of major figures in the theft ring. One, a trucking firm official who had a large contract with the company. That story tomorrow. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News reporting.
shell house. Shell house is in our particular situation here, it's even more important because coming in with a new staff and new offensive and defensive schemes and learning the personnel and establishing the lines of communication and learning the different personalities is vitally important for any staff and any football team as far as the players are concerned.
I think I may grab one and hug him every once in a while if he makes a good play. We'd like one to be.
We're running an offense that is unlike anything that they've done here in the past. To some extent, they've run the veer and they've run the option some, but certainly our backs have not been asked to block as much as we're going to ask them to block. And defensively, we're switching from a 4-3 alignment to a 5-2 alignment, which is entirely different. It takes different type personnel. It takes, the schemes are just a great deal different. So that's going to take a lot of adjustment on the part of the players and the coaches themselves.
Keep it low, keep it low, keep it low.